Ontem eu sonhei que estava em Moscou, dançando pagode russo na boate Cossacô.
Ontem eu sonhei que estava em Moscou, dançando pagode russo na boate Cossacô.
Brazil kicked off its World Cup campaign on Sunday with an underwhelming 1-1 draw against Switzerland. It was the first time in 40 years that Brazil hasn't won its first World Cup match. But that's not the only weird thing about this year's tournament. Brazilians seem not to care as much as they used to care about the biggest tournament in world football. Opinion polls show that 53% of Brazilians are not interested in the 2018 World Cup. And today we're going to discuss why that's happening. My name is Gustavo Ribeiro, and this is Explaining Brazil. Actually, I'm crazy about the World Cup. It's 1 month of insanity during which I try to watch every single game, to the great regret of my wife. Even this podcast recording was delayed by 1 hour so it could watch Russia and Egypt play. Nevertheless, I'm interested to dig a little bit and find out why Brazilians are not like me and are not invested in the national football team as they used to be. And to talk about that, I'm joined by Matias Pinto, who is an historian and a football fanatic. Thank you, Matias.
Hello, Gustavo, and all the listeners of the Explaining Brazil. It's a kind of weird to change the role here in this podcast.
Exactly, because listeners don't know about this, but Matias is actually involved in every single podcast we've recorded so far. Matias works at Central 3, the studio which hosts our podcast in Central São Paulo. So now, for the first time, you take the microphones.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Matias, 4 years ago, Brazil was the host of the World Cup. In 2013, 1 year before the World Cup, millions of Brazilians protested against public spending on stadiums, while hospitals and schools are subpar in Brazil. And they used to shout, there will be no World Cup. But once the game started, people seemed to forget about political problems and started enjoying the event. So what's different now? It's just that the World Cup is not here, it's far?
Well, in 2013, the demos are not against the World Cup or the Federations Cup. It was against the rise of the bus ticket in the major cities of Brazil. So the demos start in June, in the same month of the Federations Cup, who is traditional a lab for the World Cup at the host country of this huge event.
In 2014, even with the political climate as complicated as it was, people enjoyed the event. People cared about the event. And in years before as well, in other editions of the World Cup, you used to see more yellow jerseys on the streets, Brazilian flags hanging on people's windows. And it's like if you don't turn your TV when a match is being played, you wouldn't tell that we're experiencing the World Cup right now in Brazil. It seems, like I said, 53% of people, according to polls, say they don't care about the event, which is a record. Brazilians are usually very much associated with football. Why do you think there was this rupture between the national team, the sport, and the rest of the population?
I think also the national team are further and further more away from Brazilian. Brazil used to play more in London than any other city from Brazil. The 5 South American teams who are playing in Russia right now, just Brazil don't play friendly here in the continent. So I think the football and the national team are losing space in Brazil, not just because the political moment, but the sport are not strong as used to.
But still, in the National League, attendance is speaking, right?
In kind of ways. With the constructions of new stadiums, you attract a new kind of supporter, a more like
a wealthier supporter.
Yeah, a wealthier supporter, because the tickets also highs. So people who don't have money don't follow their clubs like used to. So.
And those are the hardcore fans, right?
Yeah. It's the Brazil football is always this discussion about the lower and the high classes. Most of the Brazilian football derbies, has this element.
And since you're a historian, I would like for you to help me portray this to our listeners. You said the Brazilian football team is more and more detached from the country. How was it used to be? Because we hosted 2 World Cups.
Yeah.
We had epic failures on both occasions. But the reaction to the failure was very different. In 1950, the team was the country. And Nelson Rodrigues, who was one of Brazil's most celebrated football pundits, used to call the national team the motherland on cleats. When Brazil loses the final game against Uruguay, it was as the nation had failed. The project of a Brazilian nation had failed. And when we were pounded by Germany 7-1, it was more of a joke. It was more meme material than anything else.
Well, we're back to the 1920s, when Brazil has to play a tournament, a South America tournament in Argentina, and the president, Epitácio Pessoa, recommended the confederation to not choose non-white players to represent Brazil then. So since the early years of the national team, there is like a feud about political issues in the command of the Brazilian football. In 1938 was the first time Brazil bring the best team to represent the country. So in this occasion, Brazil reached the semifinals, lose to Italy, who was the champions of this edition. But Brazil has the top scorer of the World Cup in this occasion, Leônidas da Silva.
Who was a black player.
Who was a black player, which is called the Black Diamond. And from 38 to 50, after the Second War, Brazil hosts the World Cup as a symbol of the peace relations in the world. And it was a propaganda agenda of the government. So to show the world that Brazil is a big player after the war.
And it's funny because sometimes people think that samba and football are the national symbols just because it happened like that, but it was actually an effort by the government at the time. Getúlio Vargas, who ruled Brazil from 1930 to 1945, to use radio and football broadcasts and samba music shows with a lot of samba artists to create this sort of Brazilian identity. The association of Brazil's entire notion of countryness and football begins then, right?
Yeah, and Getúlio, it was a strong supporter of the professionalization at football, because it's very close when he creates the labor rights in Brazil. He always do speeches in stadiums, especially at São Januário, the Vasco da Gama ground, who was the biggest in Latin America in the beginning of the decade.
And Vasco was like the blue-collar club at the time, right?
Yes, Vasco, it's the only big club in the north side of Rio de Janeiro. It's a lower class area in the former capital.
And one thing that I wanted to talk to you about is how Brazilians' self-image has always been connected with what's going on the pitch. And I remember, just to bring Nelson Rodrigues back, he used to, and he was the one who first coined this expression, which became a sort of
motto.
Motto for how Brazilians see themselves, which is the stray dog complex. Can you explain what does that mean?
After Brazil lose the World Cup at home against Uruguay, depending with a draw, it's better to remember this. Brazil is playing for the draw to be champion.
Yeah, it wasn't the traditional bracket we have today. It was a group.
It's a final group stage, and Brazil and Uruguay play the last round, and Brazil is the leader. So with a draw, Brazil will be the champion. So Brazil starts winning the match with a goal from Friaça. Uruguay score, and then made the victory goal with Didia. And this, it's so frustrating for Brazil that Nelson Rodrigues, then he created this, that Brazil will never be a champion of big things. So it's a paradoxical way to see the things in the beginning of the 50s, when Brazil growing big numbers.
Yeah, it was more like, even if the Brazilian team is better, it sees itself as inferior to any other team in front of them, right?
Yeah, and in 54, Brazil played the World Cup against Hungary, and it's another political issue because the Brazilians faced this match against a socialist rivalry, because Hungary is the first biggest team from the behind the curtain, and Brazil was representing the capitalist world. And in this occasion, Brazil changed the kit, the national team kit, because in the Maracanazo plays with all white uniform.
Maracanazo, the defeat to Uruguay.
Plays with all white uniform and change to the canary kit, the gold and green jersey, who is I think is more famous than the Brazilian flag.
Yes, exactly. And speaking of that kit, because during the 2016 demonstrations against Dilma Rousseff, millions went to the streets and asked for her impeachment. That movement used the Brazilian football jersey as their symbol, to be in the national colors, white and green. But since normally when people have a yellow T-shirt is a Brazilian jersey, everybody was on the street asking for her impeachment with the Brazilian uniform. And then, since then, the Brazilian football kit became something politically charged, right? Yeah. And I don't know if you know people like this, but I know many left-wing friends that will not wear that jersey anymore.
Yeah, the same way in the 1970 World Cup that some members of the guerrilla or left-wing parties, they support Czechoslovakia in the first round because also it was a socialist team. 4 years earlier than the demos against Dilma, Aldir Garcia Chile, who created this kit, the canary kit, told to the press that the uniform has lost their symbol because it was a critic about the business among the football. And in 2015, they got a new political color. So it was very close to the idea of the demonstrators against Dilma Rousseff, who wear this kit to protest against the government.
One thing that I always find funny about these protests, and I'm not getting into who was right, who was wrong, but it's choosing the jersey from the Brazilian Football Association to protest against corruption.
Yeah.
And the Brazil FA, the CBF,
Yeah.
is one of the dirtiest organizations in sports, right?
The two latest presidents of the CBF are banned of the FIFA. Who also, it's a contradictional thing. The FIFA banned someone to corruption.
You have really to be crooked to.
Yeah. So José Maria Marim, who also was in Brazil we called cyborg government.
He was appointed by the military regime, right?
For rule the state of São Paulo, who is the most populous in Brazil, and Marco Polo Del Nero, who also can travel around the world.
It's pretty ironic.
Yeah,
for a guy who is called Marco Polo.
yeah, because he is looking for the FBI.
Yeah. So, out of the three last CBF presidents, two can't leave the country, and one is already in jail. José Maria Marim, who was arrested in a big worldwide scale operation by the FBI, who arrested several FIFA officials.
It's a house arrest sentence because he is still are in a
but he's waiting.
Yeah.
But he's waiting for the prison sentence. He has been convicted and should probably go to jail.
Yeah. So and now Brazil are represented in the World Cup by a former colonel. So we back to the dictatorship era when the CBF is militarized.
Well, not only CBF, the military are really present within the federal administration right now.
And also some Brazilian managers in World Cups are formed by the army, like Cláudio Coutinho, who was the manager in the World Cup in 1978 in Argentina, who the semi-final against the host nation was called the Rosario Battle because it was a very violent game.
And just changing the subject, we're approaching the end of this episode. I would like to talk to you about an episode that in Brazil has caused a lot of heated reactions. So this is a group of men, of Brazilian male tourists in Russia, who are asking for a Russian lady who doesn't know what she's speaking in Portuguese to talk about her genitals. There were among these men a member of a police force, a member of a municipal administration. How has this episode been interpreted in Brazil?
Sadly, some people still laugh about a video like that. It's a very criticized image of Brazil, who are now in Russia. The Brazilian supporters are not the same supporters of the clubs. There is a difference in comparison with our neighbors. It's a lack of representation of the Brazilian terrorist culture. So I think it's a poor image of Brazil abroad.
And it's important also to mention that this is not the typical Brazilian supporter, like you said. This group of people, first, who have the money to go to Russia, it's already a very small portion of Brazilians.
Yeah.
And there was an op-ed published by O Globo, one of Brazil's top 3 newspapers, that I think was pretty spot on when they characterized this kind of people as the entitled nouveau riche Brazilian middle class.
Yeah.
Who just because they're paying for stuff, gives them the right to treat people as garbage.
Yeah, in some way is very close to the demonstrators of against Dilma, who also in the opening of the World Cup 2014, she heard very bad words at the before the game against Croatia.
Yeah, the opening match.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but thanks, Matias, for joining us this time, talking with us, not only helping us operate the podcast.
It was a pleasure.
I also like to thank our listeners. If you like what you heard, please take a look at our website. It's Brazilian.report. Every day, we have new content about Brazil's politics, economics, and society. We also have exclusive newsletter services if you want to be briefed on what's going on in Brazil before starting your day. Subscribe now to our free trial and enjoy all of our content for 14 days. It's really free. You don't have to give your credit card information. You can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter. Our handle is @Brazilian Report. That's all for now. See you next week.